She smiled, as always, calmly, confidently, flawlessly. The house was filled with warmth, wine, and soft music. Everything felt familiar, until one stray sound, one overheard sentence. And from that moment on, nothing held the same meaning. Not the shared years, not the vows, not the glances across the dinner table. Everything once believed in turned out to be an illusion, and the person once trusted completely, a stranger. The only question now, how far can one go when the truth is torn from the depths of silence and the masks no longer stay on? Hello, my friend. I'm so glad you stopped by my channel. If you're here for the first time, don't forget to subscribe and share this video with your friends or family. It really helps my channel a lot. Please tell me in which city or country you watched this video. I value every one of your comments. So, let's get started. Max and Jolyn were both nearing their 50th birthdays, standing at the edge of a milestone that felt both monumental and routine. Their journey together had taken a path many would recognize. They met during college, brought together at a lively party hosted by a mutual friend, and from that moment, their story began. Their relationship unfolded over several years before culminating in an extravagant church ceremony. Friends and relatives had gathered from far and wide to witness their vows. Their honeymoon took them to Hawaii, where they soaked in the island sun, drank coconut water straight from the shell, and stared out at the vast, glittering ocean. Jolyn had always been a woman who turned heads, statuesque, blonde, with the kind of effortless beauty that could have launched a modeling career if she had been so inclined. Max often felt quietly amazed that she had chosen him. Among their peers, he believed they had built something rare, something worth envying. Their bond was anchored by a shared love of adventure and discovery, especially when it came to travel and culture. They never seemed to grow tired of each other's company. 10 years into their marriage, they bought their first house. A decade later, with their only child approaching college graduation and getting engaged, they purchased a property for him too. Nearly 3 decades passed in a rhythm marked by trust, shared milestones, and mutual care. Jolyn, even as she neared 50, remained remarkably attractive, so much so that younger men often stole second glances. Max never felt threatened by this. If anything, he found it amusing. He had no doubts about her loyalty. She had never given him the slightest reason to question it, which made what came next all the more shattering. It began with what appeared to be a harmless visit. Jolyn mentioned that an old friend was coming into town, a woman she'd known long before they were married, someone who had moved to Alaska years earlier. They rarely saw one another, except during occasional visits when the friend returned to see family. Typically, these reunions happened in public places, a park bench or a coffee shop. But this time, Jolyn proposed having her friend over to the house. She politely asked Max if they could have the space to talk in private, and he readily agreed. The request seemed reasonable. After all, they had a small, well-known circle of friends, and they both were familiar with each other's close connections. Entertaining guests wasn't unusual in their household. They often hosted friends, sometimes together, sometimes individually, with one partner quietly making themselves scarce. This flexibility reflected their long history of socializing. In the early years of their marriage, they were often the couple at parties who drift into separate conversations, only to find each other later with warm smiles and shared laughter. On the afternoon in question, Jolyn asked Max to help her lay the table and bring out their best dishware. She was headed to the airport to pick up her friend, followed by a little shopping in the city before coming back for a relaxed evening of sushi and wine. After she left, Max stayed home for a bit, then decided to go for a walk. The day was his to enjoy however he pleased. Later, he ran a few errands and picked up groceries. They had arranged to reconnect around 8 p.m., and as they spoke briefly on the phone to confirm plans, Max noticed Jolyn and her friend still chatting in the background. On a whim, he kept the line open, half curious if they needed anything else. What he heard next left him frozen in place. At first, the conversation was light, reminiscing, catching up on mutual acquaintances, sharing family updates. But soon, their exchange veered into more intimate territory. Who wouldn't be tempted to listen in when their spouse begins speaking candidly about them? The tone shifted. The women began discussing their romantic lives with surprising openness. It became clear they had been each other's confidants for years, even in matters of the bedroom. Jolene's friend admitted, her voice tinged with remorse, that she hadn't been physically involved with her husband in 2 years. Instead, she had been seeing someone from work on the side, a secret relationship that had now lasted almost a year. She was anxious that it might eventually come to light. Jolene, to Max's surprise, didn't seem the least bit shocked. Her response was calm, unsettlingly so. Her friend noticed it too and, perhaps emboldened by Jolene's composed reaction, asked how she had managed to carry out her own affairs without disturbing the foundation of her marriage. There was a trace of admiration in the question, maybe even envy. Jolene's ability to keep things discreet clearly impressed her. Standing in the dairy section of the store, Max felt as though the ground beneath him had tilted. His mind reeled, struggling to grasp what he was hearing. Almost reflexively, he hit the record button on his phone. He needed to preserve the moment, to confirm it wasn't just a terrible misunderstanding. The conversation continued for another hour, uninterrupted. Jolene didn't censor herself at all. She spoke openly about multiple affairs over the years. The first had occurred in 1998, just 3 years after they wed. The most recent had taken place 2 years prior. When pressed about the number of men, she didn't give a precise answer, but referenced 4 relationships that had been more than fleeting. She described her infidelities with startling clarity, offering vivid memories and specific details. Max stood, listening, barely able to comprehend what was being said, not just the admissions themselves, but the casual tone in which they were delivered. She recounted one affair from when she was 33. The man had been 10 years her junior and engaged to a woman who was pregnant at the time. Jolene had made the first move, arranging a rendezvous at a hotel during one of her solo trips. Another memory involved a brief but intense fling in France with a foreigner she met while visiting friends. That man, wary of sexually transmitted infections, had steered their intimacy in non-traditional directions, something Jolene eventually grew impatient with, leading to a swift end. As she relayed these stories, she chuckled, saying she'd gathered enough escapades to keep her amused well into old age. Max remained frozen, the phone pressed to his ear, listening as everything he believed about his life quietly unraveled, one confession at a time. A brittle laugh escaped me before I abruptly hung up, unable to bear another moment of that conversation. At the local grocery store in Casper Bay, the glances thrown Max's way were sharp and condemning. People assumed he was drunk. He caught their eyes lingering on him, but he couldn't have cared less. For a fleeting second, he even toyed with the idea of confiding in the elderly woman beside him, telling her how his marriage had unraveled in a single, soul-crushing phone call. When Max eventually made it back home, the silence that greeted him was deafening. His friend had already gone, and Jolene was calmly straightening up the kitchen like the evening had been entirely ordinary. When Max asked how the night had gone, she gave a casual shrug and said it had been uneventful. Later, around 10 o'clock, Jolene headed to bed and invited Max to come with her. He refused. Instead, he stayed at the kitchen table, unable to fathom lying next to someone who had betrayed him so completely. A deep revulsion settled in his gut. He considered waiting until morning to confront her, to lay bare what he'd uncovered, but the thoughts racing through his mind made sleep impossible. By 3 in the morning, the weight of it all was too much. He rose from his chair and quietly stepped into the bedroom, gently rousing her from sleep. Jolene stirred groggily, blinking up at him in confusion. Her disorientation quickly gave way to alarm as Max began, in a steady voice, listing the men she had been with. her face contorted with disbelief, then fear as he detailed everything, clear, indisputable, unforgiving truths. Panic sparked in her eyes, though whether it was guilt or dread, Max wasn't sure. She grabbed his hand, trying to explain, stammering out excuses and half-formed justifications. But Max barely registered her words. What mattered now was clarity. He told her plainly, by Monday, they'd both be signing divorce papers. Jolyn pleaded, insisted she still wanted their life together, made frantic promises to change. But Max had seen enough. The damage was beyond repair. Years of betrayal had wiped out any remaining trust. And so, just as he said, Monday marked the beginning of their divorce. Max craved a clean slate, one free of doubt, deception, and emotional chaos. Though the process was painful, he gradually felt the suffocating weight begin to lift. He sold his share of their joint property and purchased a small, peaceful home on the edge of town, nestled close to nature, a place where he could finally exhale. Determined to keep nothing hidden, he told his extended family and adult son everything, including the recordings that confirmed Jolyn's infidelity. Their response was immediate and unyielding. His relatives cut Jolyn off completely, refusing to speak to her again. She bore their silence, but the most devastating blow came from their son. He chose Max's side unequivocally and ended all contact with her. That severance broke her in a way nothing else had. The end of the marriage wasn't just a legal separation, it dismantled Jolyn's entire world. She made repeated, desperate attempts to reconcile, but deep down she knew the truth. Max wasn't coming back. Eventually, she had no choice but to confront the reality she had created. The wreckage wasn't a mystery. It was the result of her own actions. She acknowledged that her lies, stretched over years, had led to this downfall. The affairs she had turned to in search of fulfillment had only deepened her emptiness. This is the account of what happened, a story shaped by decisions, consequences, and heartbreak. You're welcome to reflect on either side and share your thoughts. This story has come to an end. What's your opinion? Share it in the comments, my friend. And if you like this story, check out other exciting videos on my channel. I'll say goodbye until the next video. See you.